we got a copy of it later, or what?
If you would, just tell us your full names, both of you, your date of birth and place of birth, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Well, I'm Thomas C. Moore, born in White Plains, Georgia, on January the 5th, 1914.
And I am Bryant Holsenbeck Moore, Mrs. Thomas Carlisle Moore, Jr. I was born in Atlanta on October the 15th, 1918, down at the Wesley Memorial Hospital. I lived in Atlanta until I went off with my husband.
And
When what?
go ahead.
Oh, and I went to Agnes Scott until this young Marine officer decided that I should accompany him away from here.
And when were the two of you married?
November the 3rd, 1939, at the Druid Hills Methodist Church.
And how did the two of you meet?
Carl?
I was going to Georgia Tech, and she was in high school at Washington Seminary, and we met at a dance.
And so he graduated ahead of me and became a lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And then we got started on to it's almost 60 years of marriage.
Just had an anniversary, didn't you?
Yes,
A couple weeks ago.
right. Mm-hmm.
I guess the next question is, since you were already a Marine officer when you married,
Yes.
what was your first assignments at that point, or let's kind of retrace. How did you become a Marine officer? How did you decide to join the Marines and that sort of thing?
I became a Marine officer when I graduated from Georgia Tech through my ROTC program. The Marine Corps was expanding at that time and offered commissions to various ROTC graduates, tentative commissions. So that was I graduated in electrical engineering. I had an offer for a job with TVA paying $115 a month, and the Marine Corps paid $120 plus some allowances, and I took the highest paying job. I didn't know anything about either one of them very much, but I got in that way and
So
stayed in through the war. And after the war, I had in so much time, and I had been promoted to a fairly good rank, and so I stayed on in for 28 years.
and when you joined the Marines, were you commissioned as a second lieutenant?
Second lieutenant, yes indeed. Mm-hmm.
And what was your first assignment?
We got special training for 9 months in a basic school in Philadelphia, an officer training. I then went to sea, had sea duty on an old battleship, making midshipman cruises to Europe and carrying reserves up and down the coast and practice firing. From
You don't remember what ship it was?
USS Wyoming.
Oh, yes.
And then my next assignment was to get ready to go into the Marine Corps, anticipating war in the Pacific, was setting up what they call defense battalions, anti-aircraft and seacoast artillery battalions to be set up to go out to defend the islands in the Pacific, such as Midway, Wake, Palmyra, some of those places. And so I began training and going to school to learn that specialty. And then I was assigned to one of those units.
Which unit were you assigned to?
To what was called the 3rd Defense Battalion. And we did our basic training here down at Hilton Head. We had a camp on Hilton Head. There was no causeway to Hilton Head then. There was no no one living on it except a few natives who were doing oyster farming. It was Hilton Head was then owned by a hunting group up in New York, and they came down to hunt wild pigs on Midway. I mean on, excuse me, on Hilton Head. So we were married, and while I was there on Hilton Head, and we'd come over to Beaufort every weekend, come over to Parris Island, which is near Beaufort, every weekend, and I got to see my bride for about 24 hours or something like that, and then go back over there for further training.
So she was living in Beaufort while you were there on Hilton Head?
That's right.
Now, at what point did you get sent to the Pacific?
In 1940, we had finished our training of this unit, and so we loaded our equipment, our guns, our household goods, our wives, cats, and dogs on a ship and headed down to Guantanamo and then on through the Panama Canal, stopped in San Diego, picked up some more people, and went on out to Hawaii.
And how long did it take you to make that trip by boat?
About 6 weeks, I believe,
Yeah, I think so.
something like that.
Wow.
We got the,
We
yeah,
stopped on the way.
till that, yeah, okay.
Now, what were your responsibilities within this defense battalion?
I was a battery commander for a Seacoast Artillery battery.
And what type of gun was that?
We had some old naval guns that were excess at the time. They were sort of obsolete for ships, and we had learned how to mount. We mounted them on great big wooden platforms. They were very unwieldy type of things, but since we were going out to set up fixed defenses, that didn't make too much difference at that time. So they were 5-inch 51 caliber Navy guns.
5-inch guns. Now, once the both of you got to Hawaii, what happened at that point?
We stayed there until early. We got there in the middle of 40, I guess, and then stayed until January of 41, at which time my battalion went to Midway, and we set up defenses on Midway Island, leaving my wife in Hawaii.
So was your defense battalion the first one to set up some defenses at Midway?
First one at Midway, yes. Midway was just there were contractors out there building runways, and we went in and set up the defenses and used the contractors helped us pour concrete bases for these guns that we were putting in.
And how long were you there?
I was there for 7 or 8 months until it got sort of lonely out there. Well, we did see a Pan American clipper. There was a clipper station there and a cable station, and just a few civilians manning those places. This was a Pan American clipper that went across the Pacific. But we, after 7 months, another defense battalion came out and relieved us, took our equipment, which we left there, and we came back into Pearl Harbor to get re-equipped to be ready to go out to some other island.
Now, this may sound like an odd question, but on your day-to-day duties out there building these defenses, can you describe what you wore when you were doing this sort of work?
Fatigue clothes, and there were a lot of goonie birds out there. I don't know whether you know what a goonie bird is, but they are very interesting birds that have a very interesting mating dance in which they go up and up and so we watched the Goonie Birds, and to keep us from turning into Goonie Birds, they brought us back and relieved us with another outfit for a while.
Now, your uniforms that you were wearing, were they khaki in color, or were they OD?
They were green.
Green,
Yes, green.
okay.
Yes.
And headwear, were you
We
wearing?
had some khaki also, but yes, we wore pith helmets to protect
helmets.
from the sun. We also had our regular combat helmets, but there was no war at that time,
Right.
so we didn't wear those very much.
What was the general feeling there on Midway in 1940 when you were there?
41.
41, was there a feeling that there might, I mean, I know that there was some thought there might be a war because obviously you were there, but
That's
among the men actually doing the work, was this something that they thought, oh, this is far-fetched, or was it?
No, we thought there would be a war. We thought the war would start out in the Philippines or somewhere. We didn't expect it to start at Pearl Harbor. We were making the best of what we could, and I don't know that we were very philosophical about it. We didn't think very much about that.
One more question, and we'll move the story forward, but how many men were in the defense battalion?
We had about 1,300
Okay.
altogether.
And after you left Midway, you went back to Pearl? Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, and we were stationed in barracks in Pearl Harbor, in the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. Then started getting new equipment and started retraining, doing some practice firing and things like that.
Now, Mrs. Moore, did you have any contact with him while he was at Midway?
Yes, we had mail. Had mail going back and forth. He was at there when our baby was born. She was born in Kapiolani Hospital there in Honolulu. But he had to leave before that happened. But he was, we had contact and letters and coming back. And it was, yes, and I have written, and I wrote people, and they had written me, and I had correspondence going on back in the States too, and telephone connections.
Did it take a long time for the letters to get to one another?
No.
No, we were still having the Pan American Clipper going out there, and it made, I believe, 2 trips a week, something like that. So it dropped off our mail.
The Pan American Clipper station was located just down the peninsula from where we lived, there in Pearl Harbor. So we could see the planes coming in and all there in where we lived. And my mother from Atlanta came out just before my husband had to go off to Midway, and so she was there to see the birth of the child.
Were the letters censored at all when y'all would write?
Not
Uh-huh.
before the war.
Oh.
The censorship didn't start until after the war.
No, let's say that.
So now you're back in Pearl, and what time of year was this that you got?
October, we got back, yes. And I belong to several military organizations now, and when we get together, we tell war stories, and the question that you have here on your list is, what were you doing when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor? And my answer has been that I was in bed with a very attractive hula girl on the edge of the harbor. And she had been taking hula lessons to re-strengthen her muscles after having had a baby.
Yeah.
Well-
Well, now here is a letter you wondered about being censored. This was a letter that I wrote to my sister on December the 30th, 1941, to California, and it has a stamp of 41, December 30th, 1940, and the address where we lived there in Pearl City.
That wasn't censored.
No, it was.
Oh, was it?
Yes, over here.
Oh, okay.
See that?
Excuse me.
Released by ICB 145.
All right.
Now, so both of you were at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attack happened. What were your memories, or what did you think was happening when it had started to happen?
I think the best description is for you to read a short excerpt from your diary.
All right. I'll do that. All right. This is Sunday morning, December the 7th, 1941. Right now, Esther Wold lured the neighbors in our house down near the peninsula in Pearl Harbor. They had just come in. Well, anyway, this happened Sunday morning. Carl and I were just waking up when some terrific sound and thud jolted the house. We lay there a few minutes, but after a couple of these jolts, Carl was out of bed and out on the back steps. When we got out there, we saw planes dive bombing over the harbor. Traces of smoke from shots which were being fired from the Navy Yard drifted off into the clouds. Then came a surge of rat-a-tat of machine guns. It all happened so suddenly that we couldn't believe that it was a real thing. After dashing back and forth, in and out of the house to see what was happening where, for a few minutes, Carl finally came to the decision that it was a real thing. Neighbors said it was just a sham battle. Because her one of the lady's husbands was out on a ship, recording on a ship where one of the magazines had gone out with them to Life magazine perform a sham battle. Well, all the time shells were bursting and bombs were exploding. A few minutes at a time, there was a slight lull. Carl dressed and went over to see how a neighbor of ours, a friend, Marine wife, was. Her husband's on duty at the Navy Yard. But he didn't go there until there was a lull from the firing. Just after he left, the firing started up again all around us. It was all so close, a loud cracking, popping, and thumping. We had no time to be frightened. It was too interesting to watch and listen to. The planes were flying so terribly low, we all went into the kitchen to see the planes as they headed over the house and the trees toward the harbor. As we stood at the window and watched, we saw splashes in the water caused by fragments. Splashes in the water caused by fragments, apparently. Just as Carl left the kitchen, we noticed that a machine gun bullet had passed through the kitchen and the door, and we hadn't even heard it. Later we found that the bullet had also gone through our daughter's room, passing about 3 inches above her crib, just where she had been standing before we picked her up. Well, we cleared out of the kitchen promptly. We sat in the living room and just looked at each other as Carl drank his coffee. When things cleared up, he left the house. So that's what happened.
Wow. Now, what were you, I mean, I know your memories there are tremendous. Were you guys huddled down on the floor, or were you?
We tried to. The bed was too low for us to get under, and we couldn't get under the bed. We couldn't get under our house because it was right on the edge of the harbor, and it was built low, and they couldn't do any digging down because there was water there. So the only thing we could do was to stand in a doorway at the kitchen.
And this is what we were looking at out of our
that
kitchen
won't
window.
show
This
on
was
that.
all right, but I'm just showing him and showing them. And this is Pearl Harbor from where we live.
Hold that, where you got it there.
Well,
I'll tell you what, we may come back and get a closer
All
shot
right.
of that.
but that shows our
Shows
house
some
and
shrapnel there.
shrapnel. Yes,
Yeah.
and this is shrapnel that we picked up around the house.
That was
later
from
on.
our own shells that were bursting, that were firing anti-aircraft.
All right, pretty sharp, rough.
Wow.
Never found the bullets that went through our house.
And you just picked those up in your yard? Huh?
Yeah.
Incredible. Now, in your account there, you said that you got dressed and then you left.
Yes.
Where did you go? Did you go to base?
I drove my 38 Studebaker around the harbor, about 5 miles, I guess, so I could get into my station at the Navy Yard. And I had to drive right past the burning ships, our burning ships there, that were just anchored just off of, moored just off of the coast there. And at the same time, I was trying to watch out to see if there were Japanese planes that might be strafing the road, but they didn't strafe my vehicle. They did strafe some in other places. They wouldn't waste time on vehicles when there were good ships there for them to drop bombs on, but as they came out of their dives, they did do some strafing. I reported into the yard, and my battalion was out trying to dig foxholes in the colonel's parade ground there, which they did dig some foxholes, and people were, I got in after the first wave had come over, and I was there for the second wave of the attack. We had weapons that we fired. It was absurd that we used 45 caliber pistols to shoot up at airplanes at 15,000 feet in the air or something like that. But with some of our machine guns and the low-flying planes, we did shoot down. We claimed we shot down one. My battalion did, which they landed in the parade ground there and burned, and we all got souvenirs from it, little pieces of the plane.
You still have it?
I don't have. I never kept a souvenir from it. Other people did. And so I stayed. I stayed there for the next 3 days. I guess I was there. Things were not very well organized at times, but we were there that night. I don't know whether you want me to go into that night or not.
That's fine.
That night, about sundown, we had sent out some TBYs. They were flying boats that had gone out to try to locate the Japanese fleet. And they came back in about sundown to land in the harbor. And as they flew over Fort Weaver, somebody gave the alarm that the paratroopers are landing at Fort Weaver, seeing our own planes fly over. And so my battalion was alerted to go and repel the paratroopers, the Japanese paratroopers that was presumably landing in Fort Weaver. We got all the battalion loaded in trucks with our rifles, ammunition, got ready to leave, and someone smelled a peculiar smell, and they gave the alarm gas. And pandemonium broke out. We'd all left our gas mask up in the barracks, and so we all hopped off the truck and went to get our gas mask. And finally we got loaded back on the truck a half an hour later and ready to go, and fortunately it was canceled. They realized that this was a false alarm. It's very fortunate that it was, because the Army had been alerted from Schofield Barracks to do the same thing, and we would have met the Army halfway and probably had a big battle with our own Army. Things were so confused at that time. Later on that evening, about 11 o'clock, there were 6 planes from the Enterprise, the carrier, that couldn't land on that carrier because it was blacked out because of anti-submarine precautions. And they were told to come in and land in the field on Ford Island, which is in the middle of Pearl Harbor. It was a naval air station. And they came in, and they had been cleared to land, but somebody opened up on them with anti-aircraft. Don't know who started it, but then all the anti-aircraft from the ships and around the shore opened up on these 6 planes, and they were all shot down except one of them that managed to land fairly well shot up. There were 5 pilots were killed, I believe, This one pilot survived, and one of the planes landed over, that was shot down, crashed near where my wife was. And you want to take it from there?
Well, all right, I'll take it from that. The neighbors, 3 ladies, and 2 children had taken refuge into our house that night. We were listening to the radio to find out what was happening. He had left. The husband's not there either. We were listening, and we had been told to black out, so I was sitting there in the blackout, and then decided, well, let's go to bed. So we went to bed, and just about the time we settled down in the bed, well, all of a sudden looked out the window, and it looked like saw New Year's rockets and things all over that bursting up there in the air. So we went out to look and see what was happening, and it was this plane that was being shot down and landed very close to where we lived. And so we decided we've got to get out of here. We were so close to the water's edge there that we better get out. And the wind was blowing. We called police at this little community called Pearl City, which was right at the intersection of the road going down to to the peninsula and off of the mainland. So we told them we needed some help. So the police came in this car, and we loaded us all in, and then who wanted to know where we wanted to go. I said, well, you take us. We don't know where to go. He said, and I can't help but think how funny it was as we were riding along, the light in the car inside was lit up by the light from this fire that was going from that plane. And he said, I'll take you up to the home for the feeble-minded. And the feeble-minded home was up on the hill and through sugarcane fields. He said, reason that you're able to get in up there is because you have children, and they're only taking people with children. So the car drove us up through the sugarcane field, and people were out in the sugarcane field and came over when they saw a car coming and yelled about what they had seen. Somebody had seen a submarine in the harbor, and that's when they took off and came up there. We got up to this hall of this school, and it was dark, and we could look out over the harbor where we had just come from, see the fire still burning down there. And so at the door there, lights out, somebody handed us a blanket and said, go step over the people you see here and on the floor and find yourself a spot. So we did that and stayed there until the next morning, and then we were suddenly awakened about daybreak and said, get up, we might have another attack. So we went out and stood there and looked over the harbor, and we could still see flames from the ships burning. But it turned out that there was some other planes coming in, and they were a little bit more cautious that time about firing. And then we wanted to go back to our place on the peninsula. We got down to the intersection of the road. There was a uniformed person there with a gun and stopped us, stopped the car. That was a car from the Home for the Feeble-Minded, and stopped it and said, where are you going? We want to go back down the peninsula. You can't go. There's clearing out the peninsula. You can't go back home. Well, I've got to get some clothes for my child and some money, food, diapers, clothes, diapers. So I said, all right, you can just have that much time, go down there in your house and get diapers and food and then go back. So I left a note in the house to call that I was going to go to Honolulu. But it didn't work out that way when we got up there to the intersection. I said, you can't go to Honolulu. We'll send you over to this sugar plantation. So somebody took us over to the sugar plantation. And there we went into another hall. It was daylight by that time. And some ladies with Red Cross were there to welcome us and said, go find a place on the floor, but come get some soup first. And then we just stayed there until somebody on the plantation offered to have the baby and me to come in and stay there until we could find where my husband was, or where he could find us. So 3 days later, he appeared. He had found out that how to get where we were, and after much searching, and we were sitting out on the lawn up there looking out over the harbor, and I turned around, and there was this man with a helmet and gun and bullets and a belt around and a gun at his side and all that sort of thing, dressed in battle combat clothing, and that was my knight in shining armor, and he could take us back to our home.
Now, you're talking about his uniform. At this time, were you still wearing the British style helmet, the World War I style helmet?
Yes, no, we had gotten new helmets by that time. The helmets had the liner in them, and you take the liner out and use the outside to heat your water and so forth.
So you already had the steel pots by then?
Yes.
Good. Now, after the Pearl Harbor and you guys got reunited, and what happened from that point?
She was on the schedule, on the list to be evacuated with a child to be sent back to the States. There were so many people that were being evacuated, and they were, when they could, they were flying those people with children back to the States, I believe. Or anyway, she stayed until March, and during March, she got the call to leave, and she got on one of the clipper type ships and went halfway. I told her goodbye, and didn't know when I'd ever see her again. And she got on the plane and flew all night long, and the next morning she landed called me up, says, I'm back at Pearl Harbor, come get me. And they had flown halfway to the States, and there was a scare of a Japanese attack on the West Coast, and they had turned them around and told them to go back to where they came from. And so she stayed about another week, I think, with me, and unexpectedly, and then she went. They tried again, and she made it all the way that time.
Now, you returned to the States, and where did you go from there?
I stayed there and trained did some training. The Battle of Midway occurred during part of that time. We sent half of our battalion back to Midway to reinforce Midway, knowing that the Japanese were planning a massive invasion. They had lots of 80 ships, I believe, to attack and take Midway. We knew this because we'd broken the Japanese naval code by that time, and that's how I didn't know what had happened, of course, but we learned later that that's how our intelligence had found out that the Japanese were planning to take Midway. Half of the battalion went back to Midway. I did not go, and then fortunately our carrier forces, the Battle of Midway was mainly a naval battle between ships, and we managed to sink 3 of their aircraft carriers, which caused them to turn back, and they didn't try to take Midway. Then our battalion reassembled and trained and got our equipment ready, and in late July, we loaded aboard ship and headed for an unknown place. We thought maybe we might be going back to try to retake Wake Island, which the Japanese had captured. We didn't know where we were going until finally we crossed the date line, and we crossed the equator and had a little ceremony when we crossed the equator aboard the ship, and we knew then we were not going to Wake, because Wake was north of the equator, and we thought we might be going to Australia, New Zealand, someplace like that, but instead we finally joined up with a big convoy of ships. It's the biggest convoy that I'd ever seen, some 80 ships, I think. And we went on into and landed on Guadalcanal on August the 7th.
So at, kind of two questions to interject here. At what point did you find out what had happened to the Defense Battalion at Wake?
Oh, we were in contact with them. Wake fell about Christmas time of '41. And we were in radio contact with them. I knew it when it was announced. I don't believe it was broadcast to anybody else, though back in the States at that time, but shortly thereafter I think it became widely known that Wake had fallen.
Now, did you know any of the men that
Oh
were
yeah,
in that Defense
I
Battalion?
knew most of the officers who were there, yes. They had trained with me in this Defense Battalion school that we had gone to.
I guess the next question is, I'm assuming when you were headed towards Guadalcanal that your assignment has changed. You're probably no longer in a Defense Battalion at that point.
No, we were still in a
Still were,
defense
okay.
battalion. The 1st Marine Division was the primary force that went in with their infantry, but they needed to be augmented with anti-aircraft and seacoast artillery, and so the defense battalion was attached
Okay.
to the 1st Marine Division that went in and made the attack.
Okay. Now, when did you go in with what, at what, D-Day plus what? did you
Yeah,
go
I
as?
went in D-Day +2 because I had the heaviest equipment of anybody, the big guns, the seacoast guns, and actually I went in though because the division landed on Guadalcanal unopposed, but then there was Tulagi, which was an outlying island helping to form the bay there. It had some Japanese on it. They had a seaplane hangar and some communication people and a little bit of some defense units there. The first night, there was, the night of December the 7th, the Japanese reacted rather violently. They sent planes down. One plane crashed into one of our transports and it was burned and sank. The second night, the Japanese ships arrived in there and there was a big sea battle.
Now, was that no, that was at Guadalcanal.
It was at Guadalcanal at Savo
on
Island.
December the 7th, the same
No,
time?
no, on August
Oh, August the 7th.
August the 8th, the
Yeah,
night of
August
the night
8th,
of the
right.
8th was when the sea battle was, and we lost one of our carriers was threatened and outnumbered by Japanese carriers, and so the Navy said all ships leave, pull out of here. And so we landed. I landed on Tulagi with my unit, and we could not unload any of our heavy guns or anything, and so we landed on Tulagi and acted as infantry there, did a little mopping up and set up defenses, and toward the end of August, finally, the situation was such that our ships could come back in and briefly, and the ships came back in, and we finally got our equipment and gear, and we set up one of the seacoast artillery. We set up one battery on Tulagi and two batteries over on Guadalcanal, and I moved over to Guadalcanal at that time. It was about 15 miles across the channel.
Now, when your unit was acting as infantry, normal weapons, what were you carrying? Were you carrying?
I always carried a pistol, but then I had a little machine gun, a small machine gun that I
Thompson?
kept. Yes.
And the rest of your men, were they carrying Garands or?
They were carrying, I'm not sure whether it was the old 03 gun weapon or not a Garand. It was a
Springfield?
Spring. I guess they still had that Springfields in them.
That's interesting. Now, in the meantime, he's landed at Guadalcanal. Mrs. Moore, you're back here in the States.
Yes.
Where did you go once you got back here to the States?
Where did I go?
Mm-hmm.
I returned to Atlanta with my daughter, and we stayed with my parents, and I decided to go ahead and finish that 1 year at Agnes Scott that I did not finish because I wanted to get my MRS degree with my husband rather than a BA over there at Agnes Scott. So I went back to Agnes Scott and finished my last year there. And then my parents were helping to look after our little child. And I tried to get in touch with different wives that I knew might be around in Atlanta and to have some sort of social life, but it was diminishing as far as the social life was concerned. But I wanted to keep up with what was going on in the world, learn more about it. And that was while he was at Guadalcanal. So he came back shortly, but for a short time, but for another engagement.
Now, how long were you on Guadalcanal?
I was there for the first 6 months. The Marine Division came, took a lot of casualties. Another Marine Division came in, and then finally the Army came in about Christmas time, and the command was turned over to the Army at that time, but we stayed on until February because we were providing Seacoast and anti-aircraft. And it was needed because the Japanese ships would come in every night, frequently at night, and shell the area, and we got a bombing raid every day for about 6 months. The bombers would come in. We'd know when the big flights were scheduled to come in. The coast watchers on the islands up above, over toward Rabaul, the coast watchers would give us a warning by radio that so many bombers were headed in that direction. And so we had a few fighter planes there, and the gave the fighters time enough to climb up to get altitude so they could engage the bombers. But it was touch and go as to whether, and of course the Japanese continued to react violently. They sent several divisions of Japanese troops in and landed on either side of our perimeter. We had set up a perimeter defense on Guadalcanal. They landed on either side and came in and made attacks, and there were a series of big battles. We thought they were big during that period. And, they almost broke through several times, and we were alert to the Japanese ships that were coming in at night and shelling us, and we had one battery over on Tulagi, and when we'd think there was something out there, that battery could fire some star shells and light up the place, and we could look out and try to see if we could spot any ships out there. And we did fire at some of the ships with our Seacoast artillery. Got a few hits, we think, but I don't believe we sunk anything. But we kept them off from coming in close to the beach that way.
Right. Now, tell us a little bit about the conditions on Guadalcanal. I mean, I know modern historians have made a lot
Yeah.
about the conditions, and be good if.
The conditions were bad. It was very tough for the infantry. For those of us who were back on the doing the anti-aircraft and the seacoast, we were getting bombed and shelled, but we weren't bearing the brunt of the main infantry attack. We took, for a while, food was scarce at the beginning. We finally got rations coming in, so we had fairly good food. We all took a tablet of Atiban every day, which is to prevent malaria, and that turned your skin yellow. So we became almost as yellow as the Japanese were, our skin did, by the end of 6 months there. And some of the shelling at night was very traumatic. We knew there were Japanese ships out there. We tried to locate them. We opened up a searchlight, one of our searchlights, and unfortunately I was lying on a little command post not too far back of the searchlight, along with our first sergeant and a couple of communications people, and the shells that they were shelling the airfield, our airfield primarily, but many of the shells were hitting the palm trees and bursting around me. I was lying next to the first sergeant, and the calf of his leg was blown off by one of the fragments that they had. So that was about the closest call I had, I guess. We could see the night, from where I was, I could see the night battles, the battles of the Japanese ships and the American ships out in what later became known as Iron Bottom Sound. The USS Atlanta was sunk there, and I observed that night battle, but from where I was, it just looked like a big thunder and lightning storm. You couldn't make out which ship was which ship, but the next morning after the Japanese would try to pull out during daylight because to get away from our aircraft that were left in there. So they would head back up the slot, and the people from the USS Atlanta and from several of the other ships came ashore at Guadalcanal, were brought ashore. We set the boats out and picked up survivors, and they came in, and then, of course, were then evacuated as soon as they could be, as soon as we could get them evacuated by air. So finally, after 6 months, we were relieved by another unit from it was a National Guard anti-aircraft unit from Georgia that came in and relieved us.
Now, when you mentioned a little bit about the Atlanta survivors, now we interviewed Mr. Dunaway, who was on the Atlanta and was in one of the gun turrets, and he said when he was at Guadalcanal, before he could be evacuated, they actually assigned him to an anti-aircraft battery because he had gunnery experience.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any Navy guys that were temporarily assigned to your battalion?
I believe so, and then I was in the Seacoast part, and they did not assign them to our Seacoast unit,
Mm-hmm.
although one of our batteries was down there where they were camping, and they would help whenever they were needed to help. We was building up revetments and things like that.
And then you left Guadalcanal, and where did you go from there?
Just before I left, during a night air raid, I had injured my knee rather badly, sprained it, but I could still walk on it. We were evacuated to New Zealand, And I went to New Zealand. I had my knee operated on, and we removed the cyst from it. And I was then shortly thereafter, I was given a chance to come back to the States. Since we'd been out there on Midway and been out of the States for a long time, I came back and became an instructor in a school, anti-aircraft and Seacoast Artillery School up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and stayed there for about a year and then went back to the Pacific.
What year was that when you were at Camp Lejeune?
What year was I there? Let's see, 40, summer of 43 until about the summer of 44.
Now, you left Camp Lejeune, you went back to the Pacific.
Yes.
What did you do when you went back?
Well, I still had one of these defense battalions. I was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and so we split up a defense battalion. One went to one island in the Marshall Islands, and the other went to another, and I was commanding half of a battalion at that time, and somebody else the other, and then we stayed in the Marshall Islands until we were no longer needed there, and then we rejoined, and I became battalion commander as we went into Guam. We took the battalion to Guam, where the main battles at both places had been over by the time we got there. There was still some Japanese left on the islands, but there was just a little bit of mopping up needed to be done. There was no organized resistance left. And we went to Guam and trained and practiced and loaded our equipment on LSTs, and we had orders to go into the attack on Japan when the war ended. We were getting ready to go into Kyushu, the southern beaches there.
What about the battalion? What was the name of it by then?
Well,
What
it had another name.
It had another name.
Yeah, it was a different battalion.
It was not the same.
Not the same battalion, no.
Mrs. Moore, at some point in here, where did you join the Red Cross?
Oh, all right. When they came back, and I was at Camp Lejeune, I was able to work in there. But I had also started training here in Atlanta, and went out to the Naval Air Station to do some training, and then we went Camp Lejeune, and I continued with it there. And as I went along in the years he was gone, I would try to contribute to the Red Cross wherever I was.
Now, folks today know the Naval Air Station is in Marietta. Tell us where it was when you were here at the Naval Air Station.
Oh, I believe it was out there where the 57th Squadron was.
The Cab Airport.
In the Cab Airport, right. And that, I think that's where it was.
Now, when you were at the Naval Air Station here in Atlanta, did you do any work at Lawson Hospital or?
No,
with the Red Cross?
no. I didn't try to get too involved because I still had a daughter to look after and to take care of. I did go down to Florida at one time. That was when he went out to Guam out that way. Well, I went down to Florida to be with some relatives and to be with some other military wives who were down there and to sort of spend the time. I had an aunt who's there and cousins I'd never seen, so I went down there and I did a little bit of the Gray Lady, but I felt that my services were needed back in Atlanta with my family, and so I came back. And then before it was all over with, well, later on, when it was all over with, well, Carl came back and joined us. I remember when I was in Florida hearing about Roosevelt being dying, and then I remember, let's see, one of the things that I did all the time when he was gone was, besides doing Gray Lady work, I was involved in church work and in study work with groups of people here in Atlanta. There was the Atlanta History, 1900 study club that had been in existence since 1900, and my mother and my grandmother were members of that, and they invited me to come to the meetings when I was here too.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the Gray Ladies. Tell us about what their role was, what they did, that sort of thing.
Well, what their role was is here's a picture of that pinning on the pin, and then it was a volunteer special services operation from the Red Cross, and we would go into the hospitals and on the wards and visit with the patients and see if there was anything that we could do for the men who had been sent there, returned from battle, anything like that, and go on little errands from them if was needed.
Now, what motivated you to join the Gray Ladies?
To join the Red Cross.
Or, yeah, join the Red Cross. Right?
All right. If you don't probably remember, but that night that I was evacuated from home in Hawaii and sent up the hill, and then came back and couldn't go back to the house, we were greeted at this sugar plantation by ladies from the Red Cross who rallied around and had established a safe place for refugees and had soup there and that sort of thing. And that was what got me involved, because I said, well, maybe I can do something like that here in Atlanta.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about the conditions here in the States during the war, about rationing and war bonds, and the whole, modern historians make a lot to do about the war on the home front here. Tell us a little bit about your experiences being here in the States during the war.
Well, I was back in Atlanta. Now, I guess I can't find it right now, but I do have in one of these books about here in Atlanta certain actions that were going on out in the Pacific. Well, there were certain reactions here. Did you know there was a blackout? That we had blackouts a couple of times in Atlanta.
Do you remember when those were?
I've got it in one of those books there.
Great.
But then we also were rationed on fuel, and I was able to get some fuel to drive. Then I guess that was maybe one thing that doing the Gray Lady work, they saw to it that volunteers did get some fuel to drive, and then the food was rationed for a while. Then the Christmas in 42 was first Christmas back. Well, our family set up a
43.
Christmas 43. Wait, 43. Well, it was when we first came
Pearl
back.
Harbor in 42.
Two.
Christmas.
Wait,
Oh,
no.
you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we were there in 41, still there. But 42, well, I remember that over there in my home, we had a Christmas tree. We were wondering whether we should put lights on the Christmas tree, whether we should use that electricity for the lights on the Christmas tree, those sort of things.
Were a lot of people that you knew involved in the World War II cause?
Was I involved in the what?
Were a lot of people that you knew involved in different World War II causes in Atlanta?
Well, I felt that it was important that I carry my own load, and I was doing what I could as far as contributing by doing the things, the Red Cross work, by taking my little daughter around and being with her, spending some time with her, and getting involved in the church activities in the community. It was rather interesting attending some of the church services and the feelings that some of the people expressed at that time. But you could tell they had never been through anything like a war. But it took a while, and it all developed.
Well, did you tell them about my coming back and seeing you graduate, didn't see you graduate? I came back when I came back from New Zealand, she was getting ready to graduate from Agnes Scott College, and they were having, this was in May, and they were having a May Day festival, and all the girls out there participated. She was dressed up as a bunch of grapes, I believe, and so I carried our little daughter, who was 1 year old at that time. Yeah, 2 years old. Yeah, 2 years old at that time. I carried her out there, and we watched the May Day dance. And Agnes Scott didn't have many married people at that time. There were very few married people allowed to go to Agnes Scott. But anyway, they were dancing around the maypole. My little daughter sort of got away from me and said, "That's my mama," and went running out to that bunch of grapes.
That's it.